Welcome back to the Coach Robb Podcast Network, Navigating Amateur Motocross, episode number 9 with Mr. Derek Harris, brought to you by our friends over at Precision Transport. Derek, how you doing, brother?
Good, man. It's been a while since we've had our podcast, so it's good to see you again.
Well, in fairness to the listeners, the reason why that's happened is 100% on my side. You've been very patient. You've asked me several times. We just, unfortunately, some situations that just allowed us or did not allow us to get our show going. So,
well,
for
one
the
of those was a
listeners,
hurricane. So,
well, yeah, it wasn't fun, that's for sure. But I do want to thank all the subscribers that reached out to us, checking in on us for the hurricane. Thank you very much. And Derek, again, my apologies for the delay getting it, but I do appreciate you keeping your foot on the accelerator.
no worries, man.
I'm super pumped about this. You and I were talking off the air that we wanted to kind of shed some light on what we're thinking about for 2025. The number of emails that I've received, you've shared with me that you've received quite a bit of emails and DMs. I thought maybe in this show we could talk a little bit about what is it that we want to lay out? What kind of direction do we want to go in 25? What are your thoughts on doing something like that?
Yeah, I think it'd be great. For you, if you're new to the show or you're just coming on board, you might have heard some of what we're going to say here previously, but there's going to be a lot of new information that we're going to be trying to put forth here. And then, of course, if you stick with the show, we're constantly trying to provide value. So that's the goal.
Well, in addition to the concepts that we have thought up for Derek and I, the things that you guys as listeners and subscribers have sent in, we're also going to take and add some other new dynamics. Like we've got some industry personnel that have agreed to come on board, help us get a little bit of insight what they're looking for, whether you want to call that sponsorship or brand ambassadors or whatever you want to call it. We've talked, if you guys joined us for the Tony Alessi show, bringing some moto dads, bringing some people that have recently retired, people who are still racing, bring in some insight, trials and tribulations. I hate to say this, right? But quickest way to learn it is to listen to somebody else. They've been there and done that. And Derek, you and I have talked about this personally in our private conversations. It's always amazing when you look at successful people, they're willing to trade money for time because they'd rather learn it, not in a cheating way, but don't learn it by, a doctor doesn't go and do an autopsy by themselves and try to figure it out. They start by reading books and then they go there. Books are there to speed up the knowledge. And that's exactly what we want the show to be. I appreciate your generosity in sharing your perspective from an engineer on the mechanical side. I get so many questions. In fact, I want to run some ideas by you. The amount of questions I get on the mechanical side, whether it be motor and or suspension, the right way, the wrong way, it's just amazing. And the parents are like, I've got the time, I've got the energy, I've got the resources, but am I really utilizing those? As the old saying goes, am I leveraging my opportunities? So that's what my hope is. I don't know what you've heard on your side, on the human performance side in the shop
same
there.
thing. We get questions all the time, right? How do I do this? How do I do that? And I know some of these answers for me, but I don't know them universally for everybody holistically. I just know kind of what worked for me, but I can't give them the right answer when some, mom says, hey, my 12-year-old, I'm like, your kid's 12. I don't know,
Yeah.
So that's where I think that we could ask quite a few questions of you that I get all the time. And I actually had a whole long list of this show that I think would be awesome, because if you are wanting to be successful for amateur motocross in 2025 and the end of 2024 season, then I think that starts now. And it really hopefully started a little bit after Loretta's. We've talked about that in the past, but I've got a litany of questions for you. So when you're ready to go, I'm ready to ask, and I'm excited to get some knowledge put through my brain.
Well, let's do that. In today's show, we'll kind of just give some insight as to where the thoughts are going. We won't go super deep. In fact, we've even discussed that we'll try to keep it almost superficial, if I may use that term. Just give some idea that, and Derek, this is a big bone of contention for me. I'm always amazed how context isn't allowed to be put into place, because people will go, well, I'll use myself as an example. That Coach Robb guy talks a lot. Well, the reason why I talk a lot is there's got to be context set. The easiest example I can give is if anybody was watching the TV show when I was working with Dungy's calorie burn rate was extremely high. And if you eat fruits and vegetables and lean protein, the reality is there's not a lot of calorie density to that. Nutrient dense, but not calorie dense. But the TV crew chose to just focus on when I asked, did he eat his ice cream? Well, there's a lot more context that goes into that. Tracking calories, seeing what his burn rate is, looking at, because if you don't satisfy hunger, you don't sleep well. Well, you didn't see any of that being elaborated on. And that's what we want to that's what we want to make sure on the show. We want to take a careful approach to, do you understand the context of when you, and I'll just pull something from you, do you understand the context of why you invested in a dyno? Okay, now you've invested in the information from the dyno, just like wattage in the cycling world, right? Most
Same
people
thing.
train with it, don't know what to do with it. All right, got these fancy reports, or it could be a Garmin and all these fancy. What do you do with it? How do you leverage it? That's what I want this show to be. So please be patient with us. We're going to give you as much context as we can, not to be long-winded, but hopefully to change your perspective and get an aha moment where you go, oh, that was the part I didn't know, maybe didn't even understand, therefore kept derailing your train.
I give you a
That's what
great
we want to
answer,
avoid.
the concept on that, which is I get emails all the time from people who think I'm friendly because of what we put on YouTube. And actually, I had something happen the other day where a guy came up to me at the track and was like, "Hey, I see you on YouTube." And I had my hands on a shock doing sag adjustment for a friend of mine. So I'm like, "Yeah, I'm going to get this sag done. I'm all excited to go to the, my mind is like focused on what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I've never met this guy before, no clue who he is. Right. And he was so nice. And he's like, "Hey, no, I saw your YouTube channel." And he probably expected me to be like what I am sometimes on a show, which is bubbly and friendly and whatever. And I'm like, "Yeah, hey man, what's up?" Like turning my shock. And he's like, "Well, I'm interested in this bike I got over here." And I'm like, "Oh, cool, nice bike," and like I could have been way better at that, but my brain was just not in that mode. And it's funny because people just, they see this one side of it. There's no context to it. They don't know that
Yes.
there's two sides of that coin, which is I have my friendly side and I have my not friendly side, and I do both, and I do them maybe not at the right times. You know what I mean? So if you see me looking like I'm pissed off at Loretta's, I might be, over
Yeah.
something not even related to anything. You just
Yeah.
don't know.
Like, how about getting blamed that the motor's not fast enough and the kid just isn't in shape? It's always your fault.
Yeah, hey,
Um,
there's always an excuse, right? So,
yeah. Well,
and it's context matter. Actually, another example is you get an email and a guy says, "Hey, you look so friendly. Can you tell me what exact port work to do to this particular bike?" Which, of course, the answer is unfortunately no.
mhm.
I'm not going to tell you that answer. But even if I could give you the answer, the problem is, like you said, context. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, put it here. Man, it blew up. Well, did you do all the other details necessary to chamfer it right and make sure the ring went in and blah, 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 blah? What are you talking about? Dude, you shouldn't be porting cylinders. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But
Now we're back to context again.
you need the
Well,
longer
it's
story.
like when I'll have a parent that'll call me, we want the best training program that's available. And I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of elements to that. And then I get accused of being too complex. And then of course they say the program doesn't work. And then you go and you do some due diligence and you find out they've gone through 3 training facilities in a year. They've gone through 2 motor builders, 5 suspension companies. And you realize, okay, so really what this family's all about is just hiring people to blame. It's like when you're complaining of arm pump, but it only happens in a race and it only happens to come to the surface when you get a good start and go backwards. Ironically, when you have a moto and you start fifth and you stay fifth, we didn't have arm pump issues. But when you started fifth and went back to 15th, suspension sucks, motor sucks, not in shape. That's the one I always love. Rob, what are you gonna do to fix this arm pump? Huh? Arm pump's all about positioning on the bike. So if your rider hasn't implemented the strength and the flexibility necessary to stay centered over the bike, that fitness, we've already gotten tons of beta testing. We know that the athlete is in shape. Well, if you're going to start using the arm pump excuse, and it only seems to happen when the race results are less than ideal, is that a convenient? And that's when you start to realize, oh, that's right. You've gone
I
through all
have a
these
question on
different
my list
resources.
for
Okay.
this. So my
Okay.
question is, this is I think a holistic 30,000. We're going to go quick over some of this stuff. So
Sure.
people, sorry, but it's going to be quick because there's more details that are really long-winded that will come from it.
Please
We
keep
can't
that in
get to it.
mind.
So
Yeah.
here's a great one that I don't think parents think about. Oh, I got to get training, right? Okay, great. You
Mm-hmm.
do need to get training. You're not in shape enough. But how much fitness can an athlete gain in a year? And I'm going to qualify this with some context for you. Is if you've never trained in your life ever, you'll gain a lot of fitness very rapidly. But
Absolutely.
if you're a motocross athlete that's been racing your whole life, or 2 years or 3 years, your kid's probably what we would call, compared to most humans, a trained human being. Maybe not a fully
Mm-hmm.
trained human, but they're going to be in okay shape. So how much fitness can an average motocross racing family who's chasing nationals, how much can their kid, and I'm sure you can answer it more in depth, age, blah, 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 puberty, not
Sure.
puberty, but how much fitness can they gain in a season? And kind of when does that need to start so that it implemented? So right now it's, November almost. When could they start to really see those gains for 2025?
Well, if you're not a numbers person, you're not going to like my response. All of our training blocks are around 6 weeks in duration. We have a few that are 8 weeks, depending on the periodization. But think about the rule of 6 weeks. One cycle, we're looking for 1% improvement of total gains in a 6-week block. So put that into a 52-week year. I know it doesn't fit like a piece of a puzzle. Look for 6 to 7% over the course of a year.
And that's not a fairly trained athlete.
But it goes back to, like you're saying, if you have somebody who never made training a priority, you might see 10, 12%. Now, again, we're talking relevant terms. Can you imagine if I could go to Jet Lawrence and say, I can give you a 12% return?
Yeah, he would be unbelievable.
Right. I mean, as if good wasn't already as good as he is. And that's where, like you said, you got to keep things in some relative terms here. One of the things that I normally say to the parents and the riders themselves is, I can usually get more than that kind of a percentage of improvement based on one thing. Are you addressing your frustrations? Are you addressing what we say in our program is, my responsibility is, number one, to identify your weaknesses. Number two, convert those weaknesses to strengths, and then take those strengths to expose others' weaknesses. So my point is, if you're good in fill in the blank, you're a really good sprinter. You probably don't like doing the aerobic work. If you're good late race endurance, you come on like a steam train, you probably don't like doing speed work because you don't have a high level of lactate tolerance. So for me, I look like a hero. I'm going to hold you accountable. We have certain baseline assessments. It helps me identify lactate tolerance, muscular endurance, muscular, what we call raw power. Let's just call it muscular power. And then how you apply that, the inverse relationship between volume and intensity. Sounds really sophisticated. No, we do tests, figure out what you're not good at, and convert those weaknesses to strengths. And guess what? Instead of 1% in a 6-week block, I might get 3.5.
You kind of answered my next questions, which are all going to be what you just answered. So there were, which was, how do we baseline test our levels? So you have certain specific tests. So for example, you're new to the Coach Rod program. What's a lactate threshold test look like?
Well, what we do, and again, please allow me to set the context. We always do a 7-day assessment. So what we do, and there's a bunch of science behind it. We'll do a deeper dive in it later in the year. But you've got to remember, on a Monday through Sunday basis, you have to factor in residual fatigue. So think about Loretta's different level of fatigue on Friday than you saw on Tuesday, right? On Tuesday, all you have is practice. On Monday, well, you start stacking the heat, the humidity, highs and lows, emotional highs and lows. So when we look at our assessment, or rather when we lay out our assessments, we always start with the most difficult: anaerobic threshold, lactate tolerance. Then we carry that into some more of what we call duration tests. And then we finish that by doing a max heart rate assessment on the motorcycle with the accumulated fatigue. A very easy lactate threshold test would be 5x500 on the rower. That's one of our go-tos. If anybody's ever used the rower, you know how you can quickly be at 200 meters, feel good, and at 300, the monkey jumps on your back, right? So what we're doing is we're testing a very specific unit of time, 500 meters, distance in that case, with a work rest ratio of 1 minute. And you do that 5 times. They're out the fastest and slowest, average the other 3, you get what we call a critical speed number. But if somebody makes a tactical error and they smoke themselves in the first 2 intervals, that's not a fitness test, that's a strategic error. So somebody who's just getting started
might do that, right?
Might make that mistake. Now take that, everything that we do in testing, take it to the motocross track, take it to off-road riding. You have a 3-hour GNCC race and you hit your anaerobic threshold 30 minutes into the day, you're going to go backwards.
Right, you're done.
You've got a 20-minute moto and you're at anaerobic threshold on lap 2, you're going done. Backwards. That's not a fitness issue. It's a tactical mistake.
Tactical issue. And that, I think most people don't understand this, is that I don't care how fit you are. If you push yourself to your limit early in a race, you're smoked. Like if you go beyond, like
it's
you said,
a physiological fact.
Right. So there's a strategy to how to race long motos, and a lot of young amateurs just never figure this out. There's some other kids, like you said, who are really strong at that. Caden Braswell's really strong at going the distance.
Yes,
it's hard to get him to put in that lactic threshold anaerobic work because he's become so efficient that it's kind of, he's just not, that's an area that I think he can improve at. Right.
Well, so, but think about what is difficult. Why would an athlete slow down? Did they run out of breath, aerobic capacity? Did the lactic acid accumulate and they got nauseous? That's lactate tolerance. You can go into anaerobic threshold. Is it because they didn't have muscular endurance? They start sitting down more. That's a raw power issue. And it's not about just throwing darts at it. It's identify it early, eliminate it, convert it to a strength, and then use that to your advantage. So to your point, that's what we try to do. But yeah, it's a big one for sure.
And then, for example, I kind of know, but anybody should know, but for you, how do you guys track improvements? So basically you've got this baseline and then you're going to collect through Garmin data, through watch data, through heart rate data, through, like you said, how long is it taking you to do about 5x100s or whatever how are you guys tracking improvements? And I'm assuming that, at the end of the year, if a guy follows a program, you're able to say, look at your data. You were here. Now you're here.
We always use the Garmin to capture both work and sleep data. And then I have a full-time programming department. It's headed up by a gentleman by the name of Davey, who ironically grew up with Stefan Everett, Small Little World, right? He's from Belgium, comes over here. He lives in California. He's in Utah right now. He's our full-time programmer. He runs our entire analytics software package. And then what we do is we scrape the data off of Garmin, and then we run it through, we call them Ps. We have 25 Ps. They're performance platforms is what we refer to them as. So what we do is we run those through. So for example, if Derek's heart rate's elevated in the morning, Garmin's not going to tell you what the catalyst is for that. Our software will.
So you've kind of created your own catalyst.
Oh yeah. Yeah. We have our own analytics software. We're an analytics company.
Gotcha.
So it's no different than you on a dyno report when someone swears that stock, this bike will put out X, and you can show them why it doesn't. Exactly.
Right. Okay.
And then we take that information to get that, like you said, not using the word repetitively, get a baseline, identify what needs to be worked on. We use that information to put together the next 4 weeks of actual, what we refer to as load. So when you recognize that the muscles will go through a stage of confusion, they'll go through adaptation, and they'll fall into a mode of stale. So once they become stale, it usually is at about a 5 to 6 week window. Is it any irony that our blocks are 6 weeks in duration?
Right.
We're trying to avoid muscle staleness.
And I think that's people don't, it doesn't matter what it is. Let's just give you an example of not working out. Anything you do in life, let's say you're trying to assemble something that takes 2 pieces, it's complicated for you and it goes together. You do that for 6 weeks straight every day, you get really good at it.
Exactly.
But you try to go do a different task that's another challenging, totally different mechanisms, and it's going to take you that block to learn it again. So that's when you challenge your muscles a little bit differently.
This is one of our Coca-Cola syrups behind the scenes that we don't share publicly. Think about it. Is there ever 2 laps on a motocross track that are ever identical?
No.
Is there any 3 minutes on a GNCC track that's ever identical? And that's one of the things that we figured out behind the scenes is how to stimulate the muscles, not prematurely, because you can excessively confuse the body to the point that the athlete becomes psychologically disappointed. Right. Again, now we get into the integration of the psychosomatic with the physical. And that's where we have a specific process in the system to, number one, optimize training. In the engineering world, there's this fallacy that it's all about maximizing. That's not true. In the engineering world, it's all about optimizing, not maximizing. So I can tell you to go sprint. That's not optimizing. Knowing how long you can hold that particular effort relevant to the duration of the race, that's where we get into the science of performance. So when an athlete gets disappointed mentally, is that because aerobically their body shut down? Anaerobic threshold is not high enough. There's a mismatch between the duration of the race and the approach to the race. So the strategy was wrong. At the end of the day, you have to have a confident athlete. But if I always use the analogy of 5 people in a rowboat and every rower is going at a different tempo, what do you get? You go backwards. So that's very important. I think
the strategy of a race, like you said, I think this is a great analogy, is a lot of parents don't think this way on the dirt bike, but they should. Go pick 5 miles. And say, all right, take your kid, your athlete, your whoever. All right, do that as fast as you can do it. Give me your best time. And they'd probably take 10 different tries at it at a set fitness level. And they would find, okay, this is my fastest pace at that. I start off at this pace. And right. So it's, their first time they might sprint too hard and then they have to walk. They're just done. The next time they come out of gates too slow, and they had a little more in the tank and they figure it out. But the reality is the dirt bike race is the same exact thing. There is a limit to your fitness. And you cannot exceed that for the duration of the race that you have to have. And you can push, right? Like you could continue to ride your motorcycle beyond your physical fitness capabilities. Like you'll be able to finish the race, but not at your peak level.
Well, but think about what you just said, though, maintaining a certain level of fitness, right? Think about it as, we refer to it as the 4 pillars of success. So look at preparation. Are you fed, rested, and hydrated? We could talk 3 days on just those subjects alone.
And that's coming up, right? I have that in some questions.
And then when you look at column number 2, right? If we know that the first column is preparation, second one is consistency of training. Have you built muscular endurance, lactate tolerance? Do you have raw power sufficient for what you want to accomplish? Then we get to pillar number 3, it's strategic approach, the inverse relationship between volume and intensity. Why isn't Usain Bolt, fastest man on 2 feet, not winning the marathon in less than an hour? Because he can't sustain the speed that he can create. Doesn't mean he's not a fast athlete. It's just not specific to the marathon. Then the fourth column is recovery on an hourly, daily, weekly, and training block basis. So you go out, all the dyno numbers, we call them dynos, ironically. You live by them, but we call them a human dyno. I look at all the baseline numbers. I look at your training. The consistency is there. The recovery is there. The calorie gap's bridged. Sweat rate is bridged. And then you go out and you shit the bed on race day. Which of the four pillars did you screw up? Did you show up tired, exhausted, hungry? We know the fitness is there, so it's not column number two. Did you maybe go out harder than you should have? Maybe it's the fourth moto of the day and you smoked yourself in the first two and now you're feeling it because your first two races of the day were in the first hour and then there was a 3 hour block and you have three more races. You didn't hit your recovery calories in between the motos properly and then you didn't warm up. Well, you're in really good shape. Pillar number two is done. That's like somebody saying that the motor doesn't work, but they run diesel fuel. You screwed one of the systems up. In this case, for you, it'd be diesel fuel going into a motor. Dynos, everything is great. Unfortunately, it can't perform to its potential because one attribute got taken out of context. So that's what I find is very interesting. And it's gotten much easier thanks to the Lit Pro, using the Garmin, weighing yourself before and after. Think about it. The Garmin's giving me average and max heart rate. It's giving me calorie burn rate, gives me the temperature, gives me what percentage is aerobic and anaerobic. You step on the scale, I get pre and post, and I have your sweat rate. Then I look at how your body recovers from that. And we do that on an hourly basis, thanks to our software.
So you kind of touched on something else. And actually, listening, I think we've had a few shows touching on these subjects, but listening now, I think one of the bigger takeaways that people should take, but that I'm taking away, I should say, that I'm taking away, is that, if you can gain a little bit of fitness in a year percentage wise, if you're already pretty fit, well, the reality is if I'm really struggling late race motos consistently, I can't fix that at a year by just being twice as fit. It's not possible. So there's a race strategy implementation that maybe is that individual's problem, which is, hey, your strategy, you're approaching this wrong. You're not utilizing your fitness to its max potential because you're going out sprinting and fading every moto. You have to learn how to prepare. You did everything else right, but there's a strategy of implementation that's going to give you your best result. So almost that's something that I think is probably your biggest coaching challenge, is trying to educate these racers and riders. Hey, now we're fit. We know what you can put out. Now our goal is for you to put that out for the entire duration of that moto. That's your limit. We want to be at that limit, but we can't be over that limit or you're going to just not perform for the entire duration. And my next question was, you already touched on it though, was how do you plan nutrition, your nutrition program and hydration program? And then we could throw in supplementation, right? What do we mean? That's a loaded question. We could really get into. But sure. Supplementation as in normal supplementation, something we're not talking illegal shit, right? So we're talking just supplementation,
vitamins, minerals.
Right. So how do we plan that? Because we've got, how do we do that?
Yeah, it's very simple. With the Garmin, you know what your calorie burn rate is. So we just reverse engineer and we try to bridge that. And we do it with fruits, vegetables, and lean protein. If we find that historically, you're making it a very, very top priority, it's not a lack of attention to detail. If you can't bridge that calorie gap, that's when supplementation comes in. So if you find yourself, your urine is dark yellow, has a pungent smell, that's an external evidence that your body's cannibalizing muscle tissue because it releases ammonia as a byproduct of cannibalization of the muscle. So the urine is dark yellow, has a very pungent smell. And you're like, Rob, if I eat another piece of meat, I'm going to look like that. Okay, well, then throw in a whey protein shake. I own my own supplement company. I don't encourage people to take supplements until we've absolutely verified that the need for them are there. If it's just, now again, we have to be careful with the young athletes. I don't need to eat protein. I just have a smoothie. No, they're called supplements for a reason. A whey protein shake is a supplement to your normal intake of food, because we get into things like the need for electrolytes and fiber. Fruits and vegetables are high in both of those. You see how that's kind of an irony and twist.
Well, and we earlier show I talked that I was getting on the Coach Robb program and been slow going to get going. I have been actually working on some stuff and I've lost 10 pounds since I started.
Good job.
That's great. Not that that's the ultimate goal, but losing fat is part of it. A nice goal. So, and realistically, when you start getting, I hadn't done dietation in forever. I couldn't even remember the last time I thought about it. Right. Because I never had been that. I've always still been leaner and skinnier.
Yeah.
If you eat lean meats, proteins and veggies, lean meats, low in fats with, or what do you call it?
Fruits, vegetables,
lean
and
protein. Lean
protein,
protein, fruits and veggies. And that's all you eat. you will actually struggle if you're a very active individual to really hit some calorie targets unless you make eating a big focus.
I've
So
never
like,
had an athlete that eats enough calories when they see what their calorie burn rate. Not one in
yeah, it's
37
really hard.
years
It is
and
really
not
hard.
one sport.
So
Yep.
most people don't understand that. And for me, obviously, go eat junk food, high fat content things, which is everything in America. Like you said, if it's in Iraq, if it's in a package, probably got lots of fats because it tastes good, But at the end of the day, you're right. There might be supplementation needed, but the reality is you first need to load it with the high quality, high nutrient dense food. And if you
First
stick to
and
that,
foremost, and
you
not
stick
to
to that
insult
program.
anyone's intelligence. That's why it's called a supplement, right?
Right.
If you eat raw fruits, raw vegetables, and again, I'm not a hellfire brimstone,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
eat snails and tree bark. That's not where I'm going with it. But if you walk in the grocery store and you shop the perimeter, you avoid any preservatives that are in a box, can, wrapper, your body can't break down preservatives. So a lot of our GI distress, if you look at a lot of the Americans, our lower abdominals, we look like we're like 3 months pregnant. That's inflammation and swelling from preservatives. People don't realize that. So you're sitting here up above, you look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Then you get into that lower groin, you're like, well, that's just literally your large intestine is inflamed. So when you again, don't get extreme with anything, but you go back to the whole idea and you walk in the store and you shop the perimeter. Well, hence the word supplementation. You're eating real food. It's an insufficient amount of calories. You need to supplement,
Right.
not
And a
the
lot
other
of
way
parents don't
around.
know. I mean, obviously,
No.
there's some pudgy kids out there. They
Well,
eat
people
plenty.
will tell you that supplements are going to garner some next level performance. It's a total
No.
fallacy.
Yeah. There's
It's a
stuff out
fallacy.
there, but not that.
A
You know what I mean?
supplement, like let's take B6 or B12, your energy
Right.
vitamins, right? If you're not able to get enough of the B6 and B12 in, will you notice an energy lift with supplements? Absolutely. But here's the key. Most people don't eat enough food, period, much less when you add physical activity. Just as a generic rule of thumb, keep this in mind. A 30-minute window of exercise is going to burn around 500 calories for the average person. It could always be more, it could always be less. Well, if you're already somebody, take your body weight, add a zero. That's how many calories you need to stay alive every day. Now multiply that by 1.5 and then start tracking your calories and see how close you get to it. For those of you that run a Garmin, if you have the MyFitnessPal synced to your Garmin, it tells you what that calorie gap is.
And
Now,
I've been shocked. I've been wearing my Garmin. And so, I'm not as active as I used to be. So my number is not where it would have been. But when I'm thinking back in my life, why I was so lean when I was younger,
yeah,
I mean, I was probably burning 5,000 calories a day. I was
easy.
so active. So it's something that, that was just normal. That's who I was
Yep.
as a human. So I don't think people realize that. You really got to
Well,
be on top of that.
well, and here's the crazy part. You're over here working your balls off in the gym trying to get strong. And by not eating enough calories, your body will cannibalize itself for energy. A lot of people don't realize this. Your brain's preferred fuel source is always sugar. Ironically, fat burns more efficiently in the presence of sugar. So when somebody goes, whether it's intentional, like trying to go keto, or whether it's just somebody not eating enough because they're distracted, your body will literally eat muscle tissue, convert it to glycogen to give your brain the sugar that it needs. They don't tell
That's
you that when
priority
they
number
do
one.
keto.
Right.
Well, but that's what's so interesting. Like, oh, I lost all this body fat on keto. Did you really take calipers? Are you absolutely sure that was body fat that caused the scale to go down? Your clothes got a little looser. So you're over here working hard to get your muscular power and endurance up, and over here under eating and literally devouring your own work that you've already put in.
Right.
And that's where I have a demented sense of humor. I'm like, again, you'll always get somebody that, and we may get people. I'm always open to an adult conversation, but you have to look at all variables. When someone says we're not going to eat fruits and vegetables because they have sugar in them, you have to stop that craziness. Fruits and vegetables have vitamins and minerals. When you get your blood work, all of those attributes come from fruits, vegetables, and lean protein. The more colorful your plate is, those represents vitamins and minerals. So when all of a sudden you go and you extrapolate certain foods out and it gets sold that it has sugar, recognize that you're stripping vitamins and minerals, which are the catalyst for energy. Then you're reporting yourself to us saying you have low energy. Well, no shit, Sherlock. You're not eating it's like trying to start I've used this example with you before. It's like trying to start a campfire with a 40-inch diameter log with one match.
Yeah.
And you don't know why it won't light. You don't have any kindling. How do you expect to have energy without a catalyst for energy?
Yeah, it's weird how, I mean, the US is really bad about it, but fad
Well,
diets plus sugar's the enemy or this or
the
that.
more
It's
you can
like,
make it extreme and absurd,
right,
the more people buy into it.
more marketable. Hey, our industry is the same way, right?
Yes.
Um, the next question I kind of had was like, how much should you think an athlete should ride? Because, and I think this is loaded. I personally have differing views on this, but how much do you think people should ride and why?
It's a great question. I always start by what is it you're trying to accomplish? We have the privilege of working with Mike Witowski with Phoenix Honda. His race, he's a professional off-road rider, right? So his race is going to be 3 hours. You can't run and hide from nutrition and hydration and fitness when you've got a 3 hour race. If you're a pro outdoor guy, you got, 2:30s plus two with a 1 hour break. You have to reverse engineer it. And so that's always my answer is, and there's a lot of formulas that we utilize based on, as you said, age, puberty. We look at the other stresses that come from school or work, and then we factor all that in. And this isn't going to make our listeners very happy. I'm not so much focused on how many hours you can ride. I'm more focused on how much riding can you do and still recover from it. Because Derek, you're very efficient on the bike. You might be able to do 8 hours. Somebody that looks exactly like you but has a Barsha riding style, he might only be able to get by with 5 or 6 because his body takes such a beating. This is why Jet, in my personal opinion, that's why I think Jet made the season look so easy, with the exception of his one injury, the thumb, which was just a freak injury that got, Tomac as well. Stop and think about it. He didn't look as tired at the end of the year, and that's because he is so efficient.
And
So,
and I think I know, I've been around them a little bit over at the compound this year and
yeah,
blessed to have been around some of that stuff.
yep.
They're just smart about that. You know what I mean? They know that they do have enough knowledge to know that being strong late in the year is one of the focuses once you go 450s. Like you said, not riding too much. You would think that a guy like him or Hunter probably ride a lot. The most privateers are behind the 8 ball, like, I gotta go grind more motos. That's the
Mm-hmm.
exact opposite of what those guys are doing.
Well, and that's
So,
why I get disgusted at the amateur facilities when literally we have a kid, and I apologize, I hate that word kid. We have a young athlete that approached us at a facility between 3 and 4 hours a day,
that's insane.
4 to 5 days a week, and he's on a 65.
Well, and then we talked to that other athlete, and same thing. Like they're riding a tremendous amount pre-Loretta's in the heat, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
get it. I understand why they think they need to go that way, but it's counter. It's like you said. Let me go lift weights without fueling the body. Let me go
Mm-hmm.
ride a whole heck of a lot without having the body prepared to capable of doing that, right?
Well, but
Especially
put it
what's
in.
funny is like what I think is funny is you're gonna go ride 20, maybe 40 minutes at Loretta's
Mm-hmm.
in one day.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we got to go ride 4 hours. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
Always put it in mechanical terms. If you roll a brand new bike off the dealership floor and you run half the radiator and half the oil in the engine casings and it overstresses and grenades it mechanically, what makes you think that your human body is a double negative here? How is a human body expected to be able to offset heat stress? How's it supposed to be able to offset calorie deficit and do that day over day over day over day over day? It reminds me when Chase Sexton went 1 DNF at WW Ranch. It's because he's training in the heat and then trying to race in that. It's no different than heat exhaustion or heat exposure and stress on anything mechanical. So,
Right.
as I always say, you buy a brand new bike, drain the radiators, run half the oil, take the bike out on the track, second gear only, never back off. And at grenades, you go, well, yeah, dodo bird, right? You went against everything mechanically that we know to do on a dirt bike. You talked a little bit earlier about how do you know what's the sweet spot for training? Well, think about a motorcycle, right? You know that motorcycles accelerate and then they sign off and they actually start to decelerate. Four strokes a little bit easier because you have a rev limiter that gives you an audible sign. We all grew up on two strokes, right? You knew if you missed that gear, and then you're like downshifting, clutching, and everything, trying to get into that small little sweet spot. Well, in the physiology world, that sweet spot is where the overlapping of overtraining and undertraining exists. That's the dangerous part.
Well, you said an interesting answer earlier, which was we judge it by recovery.
It's all about recovery.
If
The
you don't
definition
recover,
of
you're overtrained.
overtraining,
Right.
well, the definition of overtraining is not how much work you do, it's the ability to absorb, keyword absorb. Now,
Absorb.
that's where our company is in analytics. That's our forte.
Well, it's like trying to study. You want to cram information in your brain. You cannot just do it 24/7. It's not
Right.
possible, right? So you're gonna
Mm-hmm.
have breaks, and this is how much your brain can absorb. Well,
Yep.
workload's the same way. Let's say so. It's so maybe so the answer to riding, how much you ride, is going to be athlete specific and recovery specific. Obviously, time frame specific.
Always start with recovery. I
Right.
know
But
that
that's going
pisses
to
a lot of
be
moto dads off.
right. But can you recover? And I think the other important answer that I ask parents all the time is, okay, so you rode a lot. Great. Did you get better? Oh, you just reinforced every habit that you hadn't fixed yet. And now that's
Mhm.
in there even deeper.
It goes
Why don't
back
you
to
do
converting
quality
weakness.
hours? Right.
Well, practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect
Perfect
practice
practice
makes
makes
perfect.
perfect. You know, they said
And
Tiger Woods would hit some days at the range because he was a practicing. They say he put more hours than anybody. But if
yep.
it was, he might hit 7 golf balls because he was working on one thing. And then he might move
Mhm.
on to putting or something that he found functional. But it did not mean he was out there hitting 2,500 balls per day. He
Yep.
was getting quality reps in. And I
Well,
play golf. If you go hit 7 perfect golf shots in a row, load it up. Just don't hit anymore.
yep,
Like
you're done.
you're
Yeah.
done. You're like, all right, because how often are you going to do that? But the reality is, end on a good note. You hit 7 in a row. All right, you know what? I don't need to hit golf balls today. What am I working on? Right? Let
But
me go work on something else.
if you go watch Tiger Woods, every time he pulls a ball out on the driving range, he regrips. He opens his palm, he
Just like it's a
regrips
new rep.
every single time because you don't want to that's why when we're practicing starts at our performance camps, I make them go through their whole routine. If you push your gloves, you hit your chest, you kiss the Lord,
Yeah.
you do all that you do it every single
It's
time.
funny you say that.
Muscle memory.
Well, you funny you say that. I hate how people practice starts because typically what I see is typically people who practice them a lot are bad at starts. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why they practice them. And they'll go do their first start and it sucks. Their very first one is trash. They'll come around instantly, put the whole shot down, boom, let's go again.
Yep.
It's better. Maybe they get a good one, maybe not. They come around, same thing. And now they're adapting to the scenario and
Mm-hmm.
they're going to get better at it. But the reality is that's not how a start works. You get one shot at it and that's it. We don't
Yep.
get to come back around and do another one and get better. So I agree with you. You need to practice how you're going to do it on race day. And then when you said, if we're going to do another one in a row, I would rather have a cold reset, get off the bike,
Yep.
go do something else, come back, act as
Yep.
if it's a fresh start. Because if we go back to back to back to back, you're not learning. You're not doing the right
Well,
thing.
and create an environment. Like I had the privilege of going to the Vegas finale, right? And from where I was sitting in the stands, I could see Deegan, and I wish I could freeze that, put it in a bottle, and then make kids drink it, and even the vet riders as well, because all the practice in the world comes down to you have Hunter, excuse me, you have Jet and Chase and Hunter, all three of them, right? They're on the gate and they realize whoever wins wins. Put yourself, I always say to my clients, get comfortable being uncomfortable because number one, it's not crowded at the front of the race. And number two, most people don't practice being the best. So even though that may sound like a real sports psychology, type of a comment, well, the person that shits the bed who couldn't handle the pressure is probably because they haven't familiarized themselves with that environment. Brian Deegan has done a phenomenal job with making Hayden get comfortable being uncomfortable in front of a camera, doing a backflip, doing shit that would make the average kid go absolutely AWOL. Now, granted, we're looking at the aftermath of looking at what Hayden did, or excuse me,
He
what Brian did
performs
with
under
Hayden.
pressure, right? And he
But he's
managed to get that
learned how to perform.
right.
That's not just a born trait. You look
Right.
at Jeremy McGrath's dad. Jeremy McGrath's dad's on public record of saying when all the pros went over here to race, he took them over here and gave them this false sense of security that, hey, I'm beating the best of the best, right? But he was putting them in an environment constantly. Now, the fact that Jeremy embraced that, now we all get to look at it. We can read about it. We look at the videos. We're like, my gosh, he was unbeatable. But that didn't just happen. It was created. Dazzy going down to Hunter when they're in Europe and says, son, we have to win. We sold everything. We have nothing to go back to. We can talk about it now. We can see the results. We see the fruits of the labors. We look at the risks that those guys took. My point being is Hunter was groomed for that environment. Maybe he realized it. Maybe he didn't. Maybe circumstances sped it up because on Whiskey Throttle, Dazzy talked about the idea. They got offered a ride to go to Europe and then they never paid them. So somebody loaned them a van, thankfully. They had sold everything at home. They'd pissed through all, not pissed, but had burnt through all the money that they'd had. What's the mother of invention? Necessity, right? Well, Arsa Deegan's got this opportunity. Well, isn't it ironic that both Deegan and Jet hole shotted at SMX? The one moto they didn't, obviously Telmac got in front of Jet. My point is putting yourself in that environment. So when we're doing a camp, I'm like, okay, you're at Loretta's. You're going to the third moto tied 2-1.
Well, and I love Tony Alessi on this topic, right?
Yep.
All right, Mike, money's on the line.
Yep.
Right. Like that was his incentive young, but there's pressure. You're going to get it or you're not going to get it. Right. There has to be pressure on every situation.
The more you do it, the better you get. Like you just said, If
Yep.
you have two pieces and you work really hard and eventually you get familiar with it, why is
Yep.
that?
'Cause you're good.
Repetition. But creating that environment is what's difficult
Well, it's like
in a
kicking in the
healthy
NFL,
way.
right? Same
Yes.
analogy. Those
Yep.
guys can kick them all day long in the practice field in unbelievable kicks. That's why they get these opportunities. But in the game time, some guys just can't do it, right? And so and nowadays, I think they're able to pressure. They put sound on. The coach goes and ribs them. They're kind of figuring out what they need to do, and they've had that their whole career. They don't get to the
But
NFL without
here's
that,
the problem though. When you look at fear,
right?
fear is when you take your literally, this is a physiological, I mean, a
Yeah,
psychological validated point. When you start to become fearful, you're starting to focus on things you can't control. That is the number
right.
one reason why fear creeps in. That's what I love about moto. Okay. I've got to get the bike into gear. I've got to feel the clutch. I got to feel the rear end load up. When we say perfect practice makes practice, stop, slow everything down. Can your athlete feel the bike starting to load up? I had the privilege of working with Ashley Feilich when we were on Factory Honda. She never missed a second shift on a dirt bike because when you lose one sense, the other senses are enhanced. So she knew she could feel by the sense of vibration. She never missed that second shift. And I want to challenge my listeners.
Well, I
If
wish more riders would ride with earplugs in training.
it's not an accident why Tomac and Roxon and those guys
No,
wear earplugs.
feel the power. Like
Feel
we
it.
talk about 4 strokes and 2 strokes.
Mhm.
Kids over rev them all the time.
All the time.
And 4 strokes, if you're on the rev limiter, you're not doing it right.
Here's what
So
I say in camp. If you're bouncing off the rev limiter, your bike's decelerating.
it
Now,
is,
I'm not an engineer, you are, but I'm
but
smart
it's
enough to
not
know
accelerating,
it's
right?
not accept right.
Yep.
And on the track, I always say your goal is to either accelerate or decelerate. There's no coasting. Now,
No.
again, people argue with me on roll speed in the corners, and I'll debate it all day. A motorcycle that doesn't have input will sit up 100% of the time. So when you see a pro dragging his rear brake, it's to give the rear suspension some input and dragging the front brake so that the freaking bike, if you don't think a bike needs input, go watch a P-dubs.
Yep.
They're weeble wobbles. Why? Because
Yep.
they're on the gas, off the gas.
Yep.
So when I'm teaching a camp and someone high side, stop. Why the bike? You're trying to go left and the bike went right. Somewhere between transition of sitting, going from standing to sitting, from braking to acceleration, you've left a nanosecond. The bike doesn't have input. It's always going to stand up. That's a law of physics. That's not me, but I have to
Yep.
make sure that you've got stabilized blood sugar for depth perception. You've got strength and flexibility. You know when to transition from standing to sitting. You understand the value of shortening the wheelbase with the front brake, trail braking the rear end for input. Obviously, right-hand turn is a little bit more difficult, which is another reason why people I think need to get better with the front brake. But all I'm trying to teach them is I'm taking the physiology, mirroring it against the physics of a motorcycle. And if the bike doesn't have input, you're along for the ride. Or if you give the bike the wrong input, you're along for the ride.
Yep.
i.e.,
100%.
inside leg is down 2 degrees. Frame goes, oh, you want to go over here. You don't have this, you've got a boot at the end of your leg, and you keep dabbing your foot in the corner. Is the hip flexor not strong enough to keep the boot out, or is the hamstring so tight it keeps pulling the boot down? And instead of having your leg against the shroud, it's 2 degrees off. Well, guess where the frame thinks you want to go? 2 degrees to the right.
Yep. Yep.
So it's just,
So
I love this stuff, man. It's
yeah.
awesome.
One of the other questions I had, so we had like a lot of like, how much do you ride? Long answer, right? Because it varies. It's on
Yes.
recovery, on your athlete. And then to me, I would always ask any parent, well, if you want to ride more and you're capable of it, the more important question is, why are you riding more? Are you getting more out of riding more? Are you improving? So that's important.
Are you having fun?
Yeah.
I mean,
This is not if you're not a pro yet, this should still be fun.
I just don't understand when the day came where you swung a leg over a motorcycle and it went from riding to training. And I say
A
that
lot
to my
of kids
clients.
nowadays, that's the unfortunate problem. The kids think this is a job, and it kind of is the way that they're treating it. But it's like, dude, you get to ride a dirt bike. That's a lot of fun.
What does Miss Peyton say? The wealthiest day is when you're a paid dirt bike rider, because you get paid to travel, you get paid to test, you get paid to race. There's no wealthier time in your life as a motocross racer than when you're sponsored with a salary, not racing for free.
Here's a tough question.
Okay.
How do we improve off the motorcycle? So fitness, strength, whatever.
Yeah.
And on the motorcycle at the same time, because that's kind of what we're asking a lot of these athletes to do year round.
Yeah.
So can that be done? Or more importantly, into the question to me is, should they maybe focus their blocks at certain times of the year on, hey, this time of blocks is more bike focused, and this time of block is going to be more fitness focused, off the bike focused?
100%. That's what, if you go into the physiology world, we refer to this as periodization. So let's just use a calendar January through December, even though we know the race season doesn't match that calendar. And what we do is we drop in our 3, 4, what we refer to as AAA races, like be a Loretta's, a Mammoth, and maybe Minios or something like that. But the idea here is you've got to reverse engineer the year, because you're 100% correct. In the preseason, if you're lifting extremely heavy to build a strength base and you're doing a lot of mileage to build an aerobic engine, you heard Tony say that they're biking 200-300 miles a week, heart rate zone 2, like 130 and below.
And
When
again,
you,
guys, that's a out of context insert. 130 and below for a lot of people. Just
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yep. So when you put that together, when you're lifting heavy, you're going to have a lot of residual soreness. So you don't want to be on the bike doing motos at a high intensity, because you're already bringing a prematurely fatigued. And again, this out of context here a little bit. When you have a lot of residual fatigue and you have a lot of residual soreness, it's what we call compensatory adjustment on the bike. So you need to be here, you need to be looking here. Well, your shoulders are smoked because you've been lifting heavy in the gym to work at lats and back. Well, you're probably going to be looking down and you're probably going to be riding with elbows. Now your body position is incorrect. Your risk of injury goes up. So what I always say in the preseason, as a general rule of thumb, and that preseason could be 12 to 16, even 20 weeks, depending on someone's coming off an injury. The big thing is during that preseason phase, turn track is your best friend. Keep your wheels on the ground.
And you're preaching to the choir here. I actually think vet riders should spend very minimal time on higher risk tracks and more time on the things that make lap times.
What's the old saying? Turn for dough, jump for show, right?
Yeah,
You've
100%.
preached it your whole life.
If you're a decent rider, you can jump anything at any track that's important to you. That's not a problem. So why are you working on it? And then you're increasing your risk factors. Work on the things that you need to work on. Yep. You said something else there that I found interesting, that I would say, a fun anecdotal. So I knew I was getting old, and I hadn't been riding a lot at the time, because hadn't ridden like a year, hopped on a bike, landed like this like G out single thing. And I just felt everything in my body, kind of like the fat, the muscles, my whole like, do this whole deal. Like I felt like my cheeks went down, you know what I mean? And I'm like, I never felt that before. Obviously I'd put on a little weight and less strength and all those things. And that's an adjustment to what I wanted to do, was be this position where I landed and was forward and looked like Jet Lawrence. Of course, I never looked like him, but like that's the position my brain was expecting. Mm-hmm. The position I got was the sink into the bike. I couldn't stand up. Right. Well, that's an example of, I didn't have the strength at that time to do what I was supposed to do. Mm-hmm. Guess what? If there's been a big braking bump or a kicker where I landed, that'd have been a whole nother problem, because I was just way out of position on the bike. So if you're weak from the gym, you've been lifting heavy, or you're fatigued, or you're late in the day and you're too fatigued, probably not learning the right things going out there and riding too much.
Well, and this is where periodization is so important, because if you tell me that you want to win Loretta's and you want to win Mammoth and you want to win, Freestone, we put those dates in and then we go backwards from there. So we know that the periodization, the heavy lifting, the big aerobic engine, skills and drills, that might be October, November, December, which means we don't even race Minios in November, because we're getting ready for Daytona and Springading or Freestone. Then after that, we do a little bit of recovery, and then we do another build. And obviously you get what we call the catapult effect. You get a little bit fitter throughout the year.
But you can't race year round and truly physiologically be 100%. If you had hit it race weekend, you can't do it.
Well, this is why you and I were talking prior to this conversation today. Like, if you look at the way that we're doing our bonus structure, and we're not trying to be, how do I describe this? We're not trying to be like the sports savior, but we're not putting big contingency dollars on back-to-back races for this exact reason. If I can save a parent, if I can add to the longevity of an athlete by saying, hey, wait, Robb and Complete Racing Solutions and Derek over at HP Development, they've got really big contingency dollars, upwards of $50,000 to $100,000 of contingency money. Well, if you spread the amount of races that they're putting it into, I don't want to incentivize you with 3 weekends of back-to-back, because I know it's unhealthy. Well,
yeah, it doesn't make sense from a human performance standpoint to incentivize things that you think are bad.
But I don't want to sound like we're being an industry saver. My thing is, I understand what the parents are frustrated with, right? We're trying to offset the cost of going racing. So guess what? I'll set the periodization up, and literally I'll make sure that the contingency matches periodization.
Right.
Now,
so
again, I'm not
a
savior, but I realize the parents are trying to offset the cost of racing. The athletes, what is it that we hear at the pro level that they're frustrated with? No time to recover. We've talked a lot about it even in today's podcast. So why complain about it? Fix it. Well, for the parents, you want to make some contingency money. All of our contingency programs are, hey guys, You told me that you want to win races. Awesome. When you go do it, we'll pay you.
Yep.
But I'm not going to pay you. And you and I talked about this when, for those of you that don't know, we have the potential of putting together a pro team. I would never pay. So I'm going to take Mitch Payton's playbook, right? Give him a decent salary and then pay great performance based on results. But paying somebody $2-3 million a year, you'll never see me do that ever.
Yeah. And it's not,
Never
it's
going to
like, go
happen.
earn your money. And if you do, you'll earn it. Right.
Yeah.
Further question was how, so you can improve on the bike, off the bike. You said periodizing that. The other one is, what do we do during injury downtime? There's different types of injuries, so it's a little bit challenging, but let's say it's an injury
Sure.
that can't ride through, right? But you're still maybe able to adapt certain workouts. Is that a great time to do certain types of work?
100%. If you think about it, and it's interesting you bring it up in this context, because when we look at athletes that are at school and or work, when you look at athletes that have families, they have other obligations. What is it that we always hear? I don't have enough time to foam roll. I don't have enough time to go to the grocery store and buy good food. Therefore, I go to a drive-through because I have no cooler full of fresh fruits and vegetables. Then when you get injured, what you recognize is now you have time to focus on what I refer to as the non-sweating components of performance. You could focus on diaphragmically breathing. That maximizes the oxygen in the blood. So now it's easier to go faster and maintain it because you've learned to breathe through your diaphragm underneath your rib cage versus in a fight or flight, very shallow in your chest. With the proliferation of social media, everybody has a 5-second attention span because they're just sliding, they're flipping up, they're going sideways. So when you're down, do a black dot, teach yourself how to mentally focus, be able to literally physically just get away from all distractions. 2-minute board goes up, you shouldn't know who's to your left or right. Number one, it doesn't matter. Number two, most people are doing this because their ability to mentally focus. This is like literally it. I want to exaggerate it, but I believe that 65, 85 class is really struggling with this right now. And we filmed it at Loretta's. We filmed from where we were looking at and if you watch the visors, very few kids are looking forward. They're just constantly moving. They're like hot cat on a hot tin roof, right?
Did you guys share that story with David Bailey said that? He said, when he really started to make it big, one of the things that he would do is he'd be on his road bike or he'd be on whatever cardio work he was on.
Yeah.
That was stationary at the time. And he would just look at one dot on the wall and not look away for it for however long. He said, I knew that if I could mentally do that, that was a little edge I would have over Rick Johnson or Ward, or I think he even raced Bob Hanna a little bit. But like he said that, think about that. That's in the late 80s, a guy just saying, I was trying to teach myself how to zone in and focus specifically on something for a long period of time, because that's what it requires to be really good at something in motocross. You can't just be your mind can't be 10 places.
Well, we have a mental development program that we've created for this exact reason. Even before social media came around, is it's not intuitive to be mentally tough, but it can be practiced. So that's what we refer to as a mental muscle. Right? If you do bicep curls long enough, you can go from 20 to 25 to 30 pounds because the muscles adapt. The brain moving from 65 to 85 to 125 to 250 to pro, the brain gets left behind. And so going back to your original question, okay, you're hurt. That sucks. Well, your right wrist is broke. You still have your left arm. You can still do shoulder press, core, legs. You could work on your nutrition. You can work on your diaphragmatic breathing. You can work on mental focusing. You could do Epsom salt baths. You can go visit friends and family, which keeps your spirits up so that you're emotionally still in the game. Instead of focusing on what you can't do, you're doing everything that you can do. Like for example, one of the things I love to do is have my athletes swim. Low impact, saves the lower back, saves the hips, saves the ankles, right? But you can get the aerobic benefit. You can use it for active recovery. There's just a multitude of things. Well, what do most people hate about swimming? It's a pain in the ass to get to. A lot of time, to go swim for 30 minutes, it takes an hour and a half out of your day. Well, as you said, you can't ride. What you now have is time. It's about optimizing
to add things. Right. That's a great point.
And what's interesting is go ahead. When you go to something like Loretta's or a pro race, what do they say? Oh, he turned into a mental mushroom. Isn't it? That's why I call it the non-sweating components of performance. Ability to focus, breathe correctly, have good flexibility. Those don't require sweat. But yet,
a lot of parents struggle with that. I don't know the answer personally, but
the problem is it's so easy. People think that it must not work.
Well, as I say, like a lot of parents are like, "Oh, my kid just doesn't show up on race day."
Well,
And
they don't practice to
yeah,
show up
that's
on
one of
race
it,
day.
right? If you truly, and I hear that a lot where the kid, well, your kid didn't show up on practice day either. You just think he did because you didn't have
Right.
that level of competition around you, right?
Well, that's where the heart rate monitor is awesome. If I know that your athlete can go out and ride, let's say at a race effort, I'm using loose numbers generically, 175 to 180, right? It's a very tight window on purpose. Well, in practice, I can download that data and see, hey, Johnny's not pushing the pace. And or we go to the races. I know you can do a 20-minute moto averaging 175 to 180. Why is your average heart rate at 162 and your max is 171? Now, with you being a suspension specialist and a motor guy, first thing I'm going to do is say, Derek, does that bike look balanced? Is that athlete capable of pushing that bike, or is that bike unstable and he's insecure, or she doesn't feel like it's going to respond the way they think it is? That's why, not because you're a partner in this show and we're business partners on our team, I say to everybody, please build a relationship with a suspension specialist and a motor, because a motor that's out of balance with suspension and vice versa, it doesn't matter how fit that athlete is. If he or she isn't comfortable, and I can download it and I can see, wow, that athlete didn't push that bike to its capabilities. It's not getting into a blame game. That's what, as you said, perfect practice makes perfect racing. We need to solve this stuff before we, how many times have we heard factory teams that we were testing this week? What does that really mean? Getting the bike and the motor to balance. And when the athlete can push that bike to its potential, and when the bike pushes back, the athlete's physically fit, guess what? You elevate the output.
And we can't make it about the bike, right? That's one of the biggest flaws is it's always the bike. And I'll tell any parent this who wants to listen and really truly learn. We have videos on YouTube. Go watch it. If you don't know, you can learn more. You could be infinitely more knowledgeable than you are today by watching those videos if you don't know what's inside suspension. And that makes you dangerous. Because when you get sold something, the guy's like, yeah, we did the, gigawatt converter. You're like, yeah, I know that you didn't put that in there, So at the end of the day, if you really think that you're really fighting something on your motorcycles, go ride a stock one. Go ride stock suspension. Go ride. And you're like, oh, I can't eat stock. It's not good enough. Trust me. It's got more R&D time behind it than anybody in any shop here in the United States of America. It may not be perfect, but it's pretty damn good.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why it's pretty damn good, right? There's really smart people who work on it. The same people that work on factory team stuff are the guys working on production bikes, right? If not more talented. I don't mean that negatively.
No, I mean, Trey Kennard is shaking down stock stuff.
Stuff and factory stuff, right? And not only that, the guys who work on it are the same engineers, right? And if not better. So, the reality is that if you get lost, start back to stock, go back, start over again. And if you need to give your kid that mental edge, slap some suspension stickers on them and tell them it was redone, right? But at the end of the day, your job is to not make it about the bike per se. It's to get better at making the bike better, right? It's just, okay, bike's not quite right. How do we make it better? That's the biggest question you should ask yourself. Let me just drop more money at it. That will not get you there, right? Because to get good suspension requires good feedback. And that's something that a lot of people are not good at.
Let me give you a short story on that. There was a top guy that I was working with, and at the amateur level, top guy, and very finicky with the bike, always complaining about the bike, never could seem to get it right. And his practice mechanic said, no worries. What would you like it to do? He says, I think it'd be better if you turned it out 2 clicks on the rear end. He said, no problem. So he bends down, makes a quick adjustment, sends him out, comes back in. The rider's like, oh my gosh, that was the absolute best. The mechanic said, I didn't change a thing. Just ride the blank bike. And he walked away. He was pissed. And it just validates your point. If you need to slap stickers on, yeah, you can get into the placebo effect and all that. But this is why, especially for parents of young riders, teach them to speak. Teach them to articulate feedback. How's the bike handling? Good. Why is it good? How's the bike handling like crap? Why is it handling like crap? I say this in my performance workshops all the time. You didn't even set sag, and you're out here chasing setup. You're telling me it's too fast or too slow. It squats. It doesn't squat. It's stiff. Based on what? Derek, this will be the 4th time in today's podcast we've used the word baseline, whether it's fitness, whether it's, hey, go back to stock suspension and get a baseline. Well, you haven't set sag and you spent $10,000 on an A kit. What are you chasing? You don't even have a baseline.
And I drives me nuts.
Amazing to me.
Parents think there's an easy button to this stuff. There isn't.
No.
And I'll share some insights that they've said publicly, which is like the Lawrences, right? Their dad has tackled every aspect of the motorcycle personally in their former life and continued in Honda, I'm sure. I don't know, but he can do his own suspension. He can work on engines. He can help do development on those things because they had to. He wanted to win.
Mm-hmm.
He's low on budget. Let's figure this out. So he is a huge reason why they're successful, both mentally, physically, all that, but also on the damn bike, right?
Yeah.
So if you're a parent thinking that you can just buy what he has, you can't, because that's in his head. So you need to put that in your head, right? You need to work towards that. Work with a good suspension guy. Ask reasonable questions. Learn what your clickers do. Learn how to set your sag. Set your sag, right? Like do these things and make sure that you show up as best prepared you can be on race day with knowledge, knowing that, all right, I went to the track with my kid and I turned it 2 clicks stiffer and 2 clicks softer. And I didn't tell him a thing, but I was putting him to the test and he couldn't tell a difference. Yep. So I know that if I go 2 clicks or 1 click, 2 clicks one way or the other way, when he's bitching about something, it will not solve the problem.
Yeah.
Or, okay, he really could tell a difference. And not only could he tell, but I went 2 clicks stiffer and he said, yeah, it felt like it stayed a little bit higher. Oh, okay. And I went 2 clicks softer on the same day. And he goes, it seems like it's always a little bit lower. Your kid must be giving you good feedback. Mm-hmm. But you have to go put yourself through that. And it's no different than testing on your bicycle, right? Okay.
100%.
Where am I at with my fitness? If you don't know, you can't work on it.
It goes back to what we said earlier, right? When I say the word wealthy, you can put financial wealth, educational wealth, physical wealth, right, whatever it is. And people recognize that time is more valuable than money. So stop and think about this, right? You're looking at the idea that you want to get from point A to point B, and everybody says they want to do it in the shortest amount of time and do it correctly. Okay, great. Well, I had an individual, I was working with him as an amateur, had all the support in the world, and I was up his behind constantly. You're not eating enough and you're not sleeping enough. And the reason why you're not sleeping enough is because you're not satisfying appetite. Therefore, you're not sleeping well. Vicious circle. Had the Garmin, had the reports, weekly call, talked about it for 2 years. I finally got tired of telling him. I said, look, I'm out. I've got too many people on a waiting list. I don't need to beg you to be successful. Mom calls me at the beginning of July of this year and says, Rob, I wish we had listened to you 5 years ago because the doctor reiterated exactly what you said, that we haven't eaten enough. Our sleep habits are horrible. And unfortunately, he has a fatigue-related disease. We wish we had listened to you. Now, my point to all the listeners is, am I supposed to gloat in that and say, I told you so?
No, you never. You don't want that call.
I was gutted.
Yeah.
But to your point, yes, I'm in the business of human performance. I want to make sure that our processes and systems are designed to get you from point A to point C in a sustainable manner. What may take somebody 6 months might take you 3 years. It's all about consistency, evaluating, making adult adjustments. Even if you're on an 85, if you make a decision that you're going to eat better, that's an adult decision, right? I call that championship habits, but different story. Same thing applies. If somebody doesn't understand the importance of suspension or motor, right? They could be spending their money and energy over here. And it's not, how many times have you told me, Rob, most people came and ride a stock motor to its potential and they want us. And what is it that you say? Oh, I could sell you a motor package. You don't need it.
No,
like, and I've told people, you're trying to hire me, telling me that you're not fit. And I've already validated that you're dehydrated.
Right.
I'm not going to sell you a fitness program. I just fixed your hydration. Now, whether you choose to do something with that, the ball's in your court.
Yeah. And that's exactly right.
Yeah. And you've said it over and over again. You don't need a faster motor. You're not fast on a stock motor. Now, yeah, I just told you your kid's ugly and you get butthurt on that, but I'm trying to tell you, I could steal you. Like I've said to you, and I've said it publicly on our show, I get probably 5 to 20 calls a week for the month leading up to Loretta's. Hey, would you put a hydration program together for my son or daughter? I could take your $500. I could send you something generic. I don't know their calorie burn rate. I don't know food sensitivities. I don't know their sweat rate. I don't know their average and max heart rate. I know nothing about their ability to handle heat and humidity. I know nothing about their mental toughness. I have no idea their history, injuries or not. And you think a hydration program is going to be the last piece of the puzzle a week out, 2 weeks out from Loretta's? We've been studying that for a year to go into Loretta's and do it correctly. It's what we call temperature silos. Know what your sweat rate is in 10-degree increments,
right?
Based on duration, average and max heart rate, calculate sweat rate. Now you have a replenishment strategy.
Actually, there's a question I would have. I had a guy ask me about it.
Yeah.
Maybe they're not a part of your fitness program.
Yeah, don't need to be.
I'll say, can they just buy your sweat rate products and
they don't even have to buy them. They can get them right on our website.
So that is a product. I had a guy ask me. So he can just go get the sweat rate stuff from you, no problem.
We hand it out free of charge because I'm not interested in getting in somebody's pocketbook. I'm interested in somebody enjoying riding a dirt bike faster and longer without getting hurt.
Okay, because that's great. Because that's such a cool product. In reality, to know your sweat rate, and everybody's different, right?
Yeah,
And then on top
yeah,
of that, also you're able to piece together with that the what's coming out of them, the
yeah.
minerals, the electrolytes.
Yes,
So
sir.
now that, and obviously for you, it's a tool to tailor a custom blended product to say,
Hmm.
hey, this product matches your sweat profile. That's really the
Hmm.
goal for you behind it. But even if an average guy just says, hey, man, I'd like to know my sweat rates. I'm not a Coach Rob customer. I'm kind of just a weekend
Don't need to
warrior.
be. Yep,
Okay,
don't need to
awesome. That's
be.
really cool. So at CRS,
Yeah, if you just go to the Coach Rob store or go to CompleteRacingSolutions.com.
okay.
And just to clarify for people who don't realize it, I own my own sports drink company. And the reason why we started the company was because there wasn't a sports drink where they matched the intensity and the duration against the carbohydrate molecule. Sounds fancy, right? It's like saying that you're trying to, I'll put it in mechanical terms, you're trying to burn a complex molecule like diesel in a race motor that requires a completely different fuel. So I'm just trying to match the fuel choice to your intensity because we know the duration, excuse me, the other way around. The duration dictates intensity. Think
Yeah.
about
And so
that.
you have a fuel now that's not just because it's the most popular one. It's not just Gatorade.
No, we have
It's the
three
flavor,
formulas.
right? It's a
We have
formula
three.
of Gatorade you need for that day. And I hate to use that analogy of Gatorade, but it's a
No,
complete, it's a
it's
CRS
the
product
biggest. Yeah,
that,
it's the biggest one out
right.
there.
And it's obviously sounds like a duh, but it's a little more complicated. It's not a product that's just so easy for people to understand. I don't think people realize you will make a custom blended product for Derek. You'll say, hey,
Yes.
this is your electrolyte profile. Obviously, you could sell it to somebody else, but the point is, this is for you with your profile. I don't think people understand it's not just three products, it's for you.
Well, it's just designed. We start by creating a product and it gets into molecules and electrolytes. We even have a lactic acid buffer in two of our three lines because we know when the heart rate goes up, you're going to produce a high level of lactate. So we preempt it by putting a lactic acid buffer in it. We know when your heart rate is elevated, you're going to sweat more, which means you're going to lose more electrolytes. So we put more electrolytes in the formula. What I want to know is Derek losing, excuse me, more sodium and potassium, or is he losing more calcium and magnesium? When we get that sweat profile, I send that to my manufacturer, and they every time Derek orders, you could order grape, lemon, lime, watermelon, whatever. The ingredients of the molecule and the ratio of electrolytes matches your profile. So every time you order, that profile is put into the
Right.
mix.
And so I don't think people grasp it. I think I didn't know that previously until that's so cool. So we're going to have more on that in the future. Actually, you'll see it through me. I'll publish my data and people can kind of see
Absolutely.
what's going on there. So that'd be great. So speaking on that, so how do we handle the heat?
Well, the biggest thing with heat is people have to realize, particularly in a hot and humid environment, I always use Loretta's as an example, that the body can't wick away heat through the exothermic
Wait. You're telling me that Loretta's is hot?
just a little bit,
Oh,
just a wee bit,
I didn't know that.
just a wee bit, right? Yeah, people
People
walk
seem to
in
show
there and
up every year and go,
boom.
it's not even hot. Oh,
Yeah,
wait a second. We weren't prepared for the heat. He wasn't ready for the heat. Okay. So we're just
yeah,
saying now, which is October,
yeah, we're 10 months ahead,
that it's
right?
hot at Loretta's.
Well, and then add insult to injury. Most people don't realize when we give a relative humidity number,
It's
that's
relative.
it's the amount of moisture that's in the air. So when you're at 100% humidity,
It's a
that means
lot.
the saturation point in the air is 100% wet.
So from motor building perspective, people don't know that it's relative humidity level.
Right.
So it actually, if it's 60 degrees out and 100% humid, yes, it's as much moisture as the air can hold. But the amount of moisture the air can hold at 100 degrees is
Yep.
double that. So
Absolutely.
it's not just, oh, they're equally humid. No. The hotter it gets, the more moisture. That's why at 90 degrees and 60% humidity, you're like, man, it's muggy out today. There's a lot of water
Mhm.
out there.
Yeah. Well, and then think about it. The exothermic process, its entire purpose is to get water to the skin, just like a radiator to wick away heat. Well, the problem is a molecule of water, when it meets another molecule of water, does not evaporate. So you get an insulation blanket, then you add the gear, then you add the heat, the speed, the velocity, and a bike that's 600 degrees. You wonder why we have heat related issues at Loretta's, or think about Mike Witowski in a GNCC.
But you
Three
can't,
hours
right.
of
But you
wearing
can't
gear.
tell me that you can't go 20 minutes because there's guys doing GNCCs who are doing 3 hours. It's all a matter of
Exactly.
strategy, hydration, implementation, all the things that are part of your
Yep.
camp.
Well, and
So,
that's where I come across a little bit as a smart aleck because I'm like, you're telling me you can't go 30 plus two. And I've got Mike Witowski because the general rule of thumb, look at your max heart rate, At the end of a race, the deviation between the max and the average should be about 10 beats, at the most 12. Witowski, every single round, unless he got hurt, 10 beats on average.
Wow.
Now, that doesn't
Now I didn't
accidentally
know.
happen.
I did not know that you could do a similar level. I would have imagined that his had to be less than his ability to do a 20-minute exertion. So
Well,
you're saying
but
that,
you're bringing up a different subject.
okay,
If Mike is on a motocross track, let's just say for even numbers, it's a high
right.
number, but let's use it for even
No,
numbers.
just make up a number. So he's
Let's say he's
180.
at 200 for a motocross track. Well, on a GNCC, the max might be a 180 to 185 because, again, there's an inverse relationship between volume and intensity.
Okay, so that I misunderstood you the first time. Okay, I get what you're saying. Yeah,
but
you're saying his deviation during the race.
Exactly.
Okay.
If that was the case, then Usain Bolt should be able to go win the marathon in less than an hour.
No, of course not. Right.
But it's the same idea, to your point.
Well, this is strategy.
Yes, that's why I say there's 4 pillars. There's preparation, fitness, strategic, inverse relationship between volume and intensity, and then the ability to recover hourly, daily, weekly, and by training blocks.
So I maybe not him specifically.
Yep.
But because obviously I wouldn't want to know that. But like a GNCC type athlete, that race load has to be just brutal on the body. What's for an average GNCC guy? What's the recovery process like for them? How long do you see the metrics? Obviously depending how fit and capable the body is, but I'm assuming that's a way worse recovery mode than a motocross racer.
It is, and the beautiful part is GNCC, for the most part, with the exception of round 1 and 2, is always 2 weeks apart.
But you can see it day 2, day 3 after the race.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Okay.
So it's perfect because Mike races on Sunday. We recover to Wednesday. We train Wednesday to Wednesday, and we do a 3-day taper. It's a perfect scenario.
And that's where the GPs are nice too.
Yep. And then
except a different workload, but yeah.
But think about a supercross motocross guy, race on Saturday. Weekend. Then you're trying to get home on Sunday. Then you're back in the plane by Thursday, maybe Friday. That's why these guys are complaining so much that, a season from January to October is insane. It's just outright unhealthy.
Do you see in a pro? Yeah. Do you see in a pro, does travel hurt recovery? I feel like I don't. I feel like travel kills me.
It destroys. I've got an MXGP rider, and he does a phenomenal job. When his feet are on the ground and he's in the same postal code for more than 2 days, his body battery will hit 100 every day. I can show you his dashboard. Right. The only days he does not hit 100 is the days that he's in an airport.
But it hurts him.
Oh, it destroys him. I mean, he's hitting 100 almost every day. And when he travels, we're talking like 45, 50.
So it's not just me then.
Okay. No, travel's horrible.
I don't know why.
We could argue, well, you've got altitude, you got thin air, you got essentially recycled air.
And it's probably stress too that you don't realize.
Well, a tremendous amount of stress. When you're 30,000 feet in the air, even though they pressurize the cabin, the gravitational pull is very, very stressful. For the heart to get the blood from your ankles back to your heart at 30,000 feet is much more stressful than being on the ground.
Interesting.
But think about it. You're breathing recycled air.
So yeah.
It's kind of like the military. We have no idea how many issues they've dealt with that we never hear about on the news, right? That's what your immune system is doing. And this is why it's so incredibly important. You don't want to get on a plane with a suppressed immune system. Oh, that's right. You just raced this weekend. You already have a suppressed immune system. You jump on a plane with recycled air, your immune system just can't keep grenading these, we refer to them as microbes. Right. They keep invading your system.
So here's a crazy question that is not related to our show.
Yep.
Egan has flown privately, to a couple rounds that he publicized. I think we caught wind. Maybe he did more than he publicized for good reason. He should.
Yep.
But I saw a video the other day. NASCAR flies the team and team members and everybody privately. And it's like 120 people that have to go per team. So like, it's a lot, right? So that realistically, it's probably cheaper for them to have a jet for all 120 or two, they say 2 jets per crew. Because realistically paying for 120 tickets commercially would probably be worse. But the point is they're able to leverage their time. They're around the same group of people. So maybe it's a little bit less stress on the drivers and the crew when they do that, I'd assume.
Well, there's a lot of elements to it. I've had the privilege of flying private, and it's amazing. When they say that wheels are going to go up at 11, you can roll up at 10 to 11. You go from your vehicle, you check in, you go out to the plane goes up. So think about it. I get an extra night in my bed. I get to eat my normal food. I don't have the stress of sitting in with my knees up against my chest. I don't have the turkey beside me snoring. The recycled air is people I know and trust, to your point.
Right. People that are on the same.
The food is high quality. It's not snacks coming out of a bag because you can bring your own food or you can make pre-arrangements. Right. It's straight up, it's straight down. Usually you're getting picked up at the airport, whether it's a rental car or a chauffeur. So now your wheels are down. They drop you walk down, you get in a vehicle, you're gone. With
So
no,
on that concept, if you're an amateurs and you're traveling across the country, it's probably stressful just to sit in a car, even though it is your family, it is your, so maybe people should budget on like an extra, like a, I hate to say it, but if you have the time, get there earlier in a day of recovery.
yeah, we always say try to give an entire day to just travel. And then when you are traveling, like if you're in a sprinter van, get your feet up above your heart so that gravity pulls the fluid. Because when you're sitting here, as we are, and anyone that's listening to this podcast in a seated position, you have a 90-degree ankle at your knee, excuse me, a 90-degree angle at your ankles, a 90-degree at the knee, 90-degree quad to torso. The amount of stress that it takes for the heart to pull through 390 degrees is quite high. Well, reduce stress, straighten your legs out, put your feet above your heart. Gravity pulls the venous blood flow back. You have a lower heart rate.
So it's just
Now,
all about mitigating. I think the theme I hear from you consistently is recovery, 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 and mitigating stress factors. So
yes,
you cannot get great work in if you don't mitigate these stress factors and get good
there's the
recovery.
key. There's the key. I can get better output with a rested body. That's why I want all the listeners to always put physiology in terms of mechanical. Would you rather take a bike that's got 1 or 100 hours to Millville and run it in the mud, elevation, mud? Everybody listening would say 100% I want that bike with 1 hour. Well, when you've got a resting heart rate that's elevated, body battery suppressed, HRVs out of balance, you feel like garbage, you're snippy, snappy, you're biting everyone's head off. Is that really the human body that needs to go put in a
No.
hard workout?
And I'm learning, myself a little bit.
Yep.
Once I get myself knocked down, it's a multi-day recovery.
And that's
Like
the key, not to get knocked down to a
right.
minus
I'm
10.
realizing that when you
Mhm.
knock yourself down and you really, really did something stressful, too stressful, and you knocked your body down,
Yep.
if you're not smart about it, you'll stay knocked down forever. Like you
Well, think
just,
about it. You live in the mathematical world in your profession. Look at an integer line. You go to a minus 10 and you'll need enough food and get enough sleep to go to minus 3. You start tomorrow, you go minus 10, you're now minus 13.
right.
We've done a bunch of statistical analysis and we have found that most people get injured on Friday or Saturday, believe it or not. And that's because we only get to ride one day during the week. We're taking care of our families. We're going to school. We're working. We're going to the gym. We're cross training. Well, you just stack 5 days of fatigue. We're so pumped to get on the bike and we're so excited we can't sleep. When we get to the track, we don't warm up and we go out and we yard dart ourselves because you're taking the most fatigued body and putting it into the most dangerous situation. Tons
That's
of
a,
velocity and speed coming
as
in.
I got older, I did learn like there were days you're off. I don't, and again, at a professional level, you never want that day. There's strategies
Mm-hmm.
there, but let's just say you get to the track, you were stressed, you were busy, you were not hydrated right, whatever. And you get on the track. And for me, I'd have days where I'm like, I don't feel good.
Yes.
I don't feel right. My corners are just not how it should be today. I'm going to load it up. And it's
You need to load it up.
counterintuitive, but it,
Or go to a turn track. Keep
yeah,
the
yeah, do
wheels on the
something.
ground.
But if you just can't do anything right, it's not helping you. Just, you know what? It's better to recover, get home, whatever. But it's hard to tell that to a 12-year-old. But I'm sure there's days where parents have seen that, their kid's in a 65, and you're like, what is that individual doing today? You know what?
Yeah.
You may not know it, but something may just be up with your kid that day. His brain ain't working right. Like
I
you said, the blood
literally
sugars
just
could
had
be
this.
off.
I literally just had this conversation yesterday. Dad called me from the track. He was boasting in a positive, very humble way. Last week, kid was on rails. In fact, he was riding and people were coming to the side of the track talking about him and watching him, kind of like Deegan. He calls me from the track this week and he's like, I don't know who this effing kid is. And he was joking. He's like, he can't do anything right. He's mistiming everything. He's overshooting the corners. I said, go give him some energy fuel. He goes, what? I go, low blood sugar.
Yeah,
I
guaranteed.
go,
Yeah.
has he been emotional? He goes, yeah, he cried earlier because I told him he was riding like a spud. I said, imagine if he was 6 months old. He can't use words.
Right.
He's fussy. He either needs a nap
And
or
these
he
are
needs
motocross
food.
racers. They're like 6 months olds on the dirt bike. You know what I mean?
Well, especially when we know what we're capable of, and you know how it is. You just articulated it yourself. You're not riding like yourself. It's not intuitive for our listeners to say, you know what, I'll pump the brakes and cruise and maybe light. Heck no, you're pissed that you're missing your. So you try harder, you only exacerbate the situation. That's why I always say start with stabilizing blood sugar because your depth perception, knowing when to go from standing to sitting, is all based on depth perception. I've talked to Jeff Ward about this when he did Indianapolis 500. He said, you come out of turn number 4, you're already looking at turn 1.
Right.
If you're looking so far up, and Jeff talked about the idea that your brain processes the speed. He said, Rob, I felt like I could get out of the car and walk because it felt so familiar. Depth perception based on blood sugar levels allows you to absorb the next level of speed. This is something that we introduce in our level 2 performance camps. You
Well, I
get that
think
dialed.
yeah, I was say, I think that's basically this show is touched on today is basically it's cumulative, right? Build everything right together, and then it can add up into a successful program. And of course, there's going to be hurdles along the way that you have to overcome, but it's not just one thing. So you can't just call up, I got to get in better shape and just go do more work off the bike. Well, you do probably need to do that, but you're also going to have to recover right. And you're also going to have to eat right. You're also going to have to prepare your race day right, which I think the strategy thing is underplayed for most people. They don't understand. And then, like you said, the inverse relationship between intensity and duration. So you as a parent should understand that your kid cannot do 20 minutes at Loretta's at the same pace he does at 1 lap sprints. It's not possible. Now, granted, at our elite level in our sport, our elite guys go fast late in motos.
But that's what the facilities screw up. They tell these kids, you're going to do a 10 lapper, you're going to sprint your brains out for 2 and then hold on for 10.
Right.
I go back to Usain Bolt. Why can't he do it? Then why do you expect your athlete to do it? Well, that's because you have an uneducated riding coach who doesn't understand physiology. I'm not throwing any of them under the bus, but I'm also not arguing whether you should stand up or sit down in a rut. I'm in your lane. You stay in your lane.
Well, and that's where efficiency on the bike comes in.
Exactly.
Right?
But
our
you
elite
can't
level
get
pros,
efficiency.
right? No, our elite level pros can ride so effortlessly at pace that yes, they can go fast.
But the
that
key
didn't come easy.
Is you can't go fast unless you're strong and have an aerobic engine. Because if you go anaerobic or the muscle gets tired, you sit. We all know you shouldn't ride a bike sitting down. It's the most inefficient and the quickest way to throw the balance of the bike off.
My analogy that I love about the Lawrences that I saw a couple years ago outdoors Jet Hunter at High Point, and I think it was Justin Cooper giving them a run for their money that day.
Okay,
he was kind of in between them, and there was a couple moments you'll see Jet get out of form, swapping not the normal Jet Lawrence form. He gets all loose and he loses time every time he tried to go a little too fast and he got a little out of form. He would lose time, and then all of a sudden he kind of it was one of those like championship moments, I think, where he was starting to piece. He's still young at the time, right? 17 or 18 or whatever he was. And you see him gather it all together. Probably somewhere in the back of his brain was Dazzy going, "What the hell are you doing?"
Exactly. Slow down.
His brain went, ugh. And you see him get in his form, catch up, bridge the gap, makes the passes. And if I remember right, he won that day. And it was sometimes it's not, it's staying within your form, building that strength core right, doing all the little things right to go fast, right? It's not just try harder. It doesn't work that way.
Well, anybody that's worked with me at a level 2 or above performance camp, I always start it by saying, stop trying to go fast and start working on optimizing. Optimize, because if you've been to my level 1 performance camp, I've given you the fundamentals of nutrition, the ratio and the balance between strength and flexibility. And then you put those two together. Now stop trying to go fast and optimize the input you give the frame, because now you've got the fitness. Now you optimize the way the bike handles. Again, I'm not going to argue whether you put 1 or 2 fingers on the front brake and whether you should stand or sit. That's between you and a qualified riding coach. Like, we're very fortunate. We have Jamie Hunkler. He's one of our top CRS coaches in the Northeast. When Jamie tells you should transition from standing to sitting, that's another conversation. But what I'm going to ensure is whatever Jamie Hunkler asks you to do, you can do it for as long as he asks, as many times as he wants. Our CRS coaches have that ability. It's not a riding coach that just says, why are you, quote unquote, not sitting in that rut? Why are you not standing? Well, our coaches know the reason why you're not doing it correctly is probably because you're not fit. Well, our coaches can help you identify, is that a lactate tolerance or a muscular endurance? Is that a lack of flexibility? That's what makes our coaches, our network of coaches, so unique. Our riding coaches have the riding coach with the physiology that no other riding coaches have. They say they do, but they don't.
Yeah,
because
it's a whole package, right?
Well, and it's not about blowing smoke up my coach's tail end. We're very particular on who we certify as a coach. But when you as a parent engage those services, I'm expecting my coaches to give you insight. Hey, please don't step over $1 to pick up a penny. Your son or daughter is perfectly fit. They have good skills. They're just dehydrated. Our coaches know how to ascertain that information. And then if it is a fitness issue, our coaches can tell you, you need to work on lactate tolerance. You need to work on muscle. You need to work on mentally focusing. Your kid's a squirrel, right? He can't stay focused.
What I'm frustrated with moto is that parents don't grasp, just because there's a dirt bike out there doesn't mean there's a human athlete out there.
Right.
So in any other sport, whether it was the 800 meter, the 400 meter, the 200, the 100, the mile,
Yeah.
It's pretty in those sports. It's obvious when you're fitness league deficient
Yes.
because you're getting beat. Right.
Yep.
But you also in those sports, pretty obviously, when you track your data, know where you're at, what your output levels are, and all these things. But you can't just ask some guy who can't run the mile sub 5 minutes to go run the mile sub 5 minutes by trying harder. Sorry, he can't
That is
do
such
it.
a huge problem. We
Right.
refer to that as critical speed numbers. One of
Right.
our an additional coach of ours is Ben Moberg, just left California, went to the Carolinas, and he's one of the smartest men I've ever met in my life. He's got the degrees, he's got the experience. He's been a professional mountain bike racer, a professional motocross racer. We talk about this subject all the time. If you can't run, and I'm not trying to insult anyone's math here, a 6-minute mile on a quarter track is a 90-second quarter. So you'll have somebody who is trying to break a 6-minute mile for a 5K that goes to the track and then tries to run 60-second quarters. The gap's too big. Instead of trying to run 60-second quarters, run 88. When 88 feels comfortable, this gets into the familiarity principle. 88 becomes easy, air quotes. Now you work on trying to get to 87 or 86. When you can do 8 or 12 of those, you've moved the whole program down because you didn't make the gap too big. This goes back to being able to absorb the work you did.
Right.
Yeah, you might be able to run 1/4 at 60, but you're probably going to pop a tendon or a ligament. You're going
Right.
to create so much residual soreness. Instead of it taking 48 hours, it takes 72. Now you just lost an entire week because you didn't know what pace to go out and train at.
I didn't even think about that. So it's something we talk about recovery, but overdoing it sets you back longer term than doing the correct amount of work. I didn't even think about that. Like if you, and that
But
you
that's
can,
not
you know,
that's not your wheelhouse. It's like I don't understand. Like I
right.
look at the stuff you post on social media and YouTube, and I'm like a kid in a candy store. So I'm like, that's freaking genius.
Well, it never
Like,
occurred to me. So that's
I'll give
smart
you
on your
the
side.
best example that you gave me last year, and I used it in my last performance camp. When you made the comment to me that not all the metal in a motor is not exactly the same from top to bottom. So when you warm a motor up, this metal needs 3 minutes, this metal needs 9 minutes, this metal needs 15. People go, yeah, I warmed a bike up, I cranked it up, I blipped the throttle 3 times. And you're like, but these 2 metals are warmed up, this third one is not, and the third one's what gets out of balance, warped, and ends up degrading the motor. That to me was an epiphany. I'm like, I would have never thought about that. So for you, I don't expect you to think about recovery, just like I wouldn't have thought about different material takes longer to heat up, but when done correctly, increases the longevity of the bike. That was an epiphany. I'm like, man, do I feel like an absolute idiot not thinking about it? I needed you to tell me, well, guess what? Now when I heat cycle my bikes, I really heat cycle my bikes.
Right. I get everything to Tim. Same
And
with the body.
I've bugged
Yeah.
you about my Harley. How long do I need to let it? Because I want to do it right. I don't
Yeah.
need to grenade my bike. For the parents that want to know how to properly warm up, there's a right and a wrong way. How to train is a right and a wrong.
And we've
I
had our
want to,
previous podcasts. Some of
yeah,
the human side of that's in these, right? Warm ups
yeah.
and situations, but obviously get a guy like you and all of a sudden these answers are there.
Well, and
So,
it's not a sales pitch for me. If you can go and find somebody who's got the background, go for it. There's plenty of coaches that are out there. My job is, unfortunately, over the years, I've tried to work with a lot of riding coaches and they see me as competition, so they won't work with me. In fact, they'll actually stab me in the back, say crass things that aren't true, right? I had hired a riding coach to come down, and the riding coach actually stole 2 of my riders and told them they didn't need me, they only needed him. He got him to move into his property, which that's fine. That just shows a lack of integrity. But what was interesting is the riding coach, his wife got a weekend certificate in nutrition. And instead of eating a balanced meal of eggs and avocados and water, the riding coach's wife said, all you need is a bowl of cereal. So that just shows you the parents like, okay, well, he's an ex-pro, so he must know everything. Hey, I've had hundreds of 250s, and Mitch damn sure shouldn't hire me as a factory mechanic. Yeah, I've read the manual.
Yeah.
But that's why I want the parents to understand. I understand from a physiology standpoint, there are parents, there's even pros, and I won't mention any names, who hired high profile, quote unquote, trainers, who the trainer took every dollar of their salary and then ruined the person's health. So not only did they lose their money, I understand there's people that are jaded. I'm sure there's people that bought 8 kits, and when they tore the internals down, found out they didn't get what they paid for.
Hey, I'm going to be
people,
guilty of that.
well, there's people that have paid for mod motors
That didn't get anything.
I've talked to motor builders that are like, I dynoed this motor, and what you thought you paid for versus what you got, your motor's not even faster than stock. Now, I'm not blowing smoke up your skirt. Here's a dyno report. I'm not blowing smoke up your skirt. Here's a heart rate. Here's a HRV. Here's a time trial. Here's a lactate tolerance assessment. Here's a lactate accumulation.
Right. You had that podcast with Jace, and he, I mean, it was obvious to him that when he's like, yeah, my HRV got low, I started having troubles.
Yep.
Like, it's a crazy how accurate that was, right? And
Mhm.
it's amazing. So it
Well,
it
as
really
you always
is.
tell me, because you live by zeros and ones just like I do, what do you always tell me? I own a dyno, and not many people want to dyno their motor. They think it's strong, they think it's durable, and then with just a little bit of time, a few dollars, you can differentiate the truth from what you think it is. Yes,
I don't get it, right?
me
I
either.
own it for basic reasons. I didn't buy it for me, really. I mean, I did for me, right? But
But
it's
to pass that knowledge along to those who want to leverage it.
right.
And that's why I love where we're at. Like you said, you don't have to be a client of ours. We have a multitude of resources, completeracing solutions.com. There's articles there, there's resources on there. I'm not trying to get a dollar out of everybody. What I
Yeah,
am
my
trying to
YouTube
do,
channel is 100% free.
yeah, yeah,
I have
exactly. Yep,
really good info on there, right?
yep.
Like stuff that no other shop is showing. I don't know why. Maybe they don't want to or whatever. But and there's
Well,
stuff I don't show.
you
But
do know why, because it's, hey, for 19.99, just around the corner, I'll give you the insight. And that's what pisses me off to no end. I want the sport to grow with athletes who bounce and don't break, athletes that don't get burnt out physically and mentally. When I see a public announcement that somebody's retired and they're 19 years old,
right,
that's avoidable. When a parent calls me and tells me their son or daughter has EBV, Epstein-Barr virus, that's avoidable. So for me, yes, I will go on every podcast I'm invited on. I'll continue to grow this podcast network, because if I can get in front of one person, from an 85 to a vet rider, if we can get just a nugget of knowledge, it's like you heat cycle your bike and it keeps people from grenading a bike, and saves them $3,000 on a rebuild. Dude, we've done our job,
yeah, like it's
so
just better. Yeah, 100%. I
I
agree
could
with
talk
that.
about this all day,
We could.
but well, man, on the next show, we'll flip it around, because I've got a multitude of questions for you. I've been sitting on a bunch of emails that have come in, and not so much on DMs. I don't get DM'd a lot, but a lot of emails asking questions, that asking me if I would ask you. So if you're cool with it,
Yeah.
our next show will do that, because that'll put us into the middle of, well, actually, because we do our show once a month, that'll put us through November.
Yep.
We'll do another one at Christmas, and we'll just lay in these next two shows. We'll lay it
Yeah.
out,
And
and
then
we'll
we've
give.
got good stuff coming for this year that we're kind of said here, but we got contingency programs for CRS elite riders. And actually, I think we discussed it'll be any CRS client.
Yes, sir.
If they're a HP client as well, then
Yep.
we're going to have contingency program for select events, and
Yes.
very good program. So you want to go out there and kick ass, then we want you to kick ass and be able to afford it. And that's kind of
Absolutely.
the goal that's there. So we're trying to invest and put back the best we can, but at the same time, do it in a way that I think makes sense for everybody involved, which is, hey, you say you're going to go win. Okay. Well, don't just ask for something and go win and tell me you're going to win. Go win and you'll go get something, and that's kind of
Absolutely.
that's how the world works,
Yep.
unfortunately. So
Yeah. We will reward results. There's no doubt about it. But
yeah,
we also want to give you the right tools, the right knowledge to do it, both as a parent and as a racer. And if you wear both of those hats, we want to do both for you. So, Derek, I can't thank you enough for this time, man. For all of you that have been following us, thank you. If you're a new subscriber, thank you for that. I want to thank our today's show sponsor, Precision Transport. Without those guys, this is a collective effort with the knowledge. Derek, again, thank you for your time, and we will see you guys again next month. Be safe.